Welcome to the Hero Next Door podcast, where we feature stories of everyday heroes, people who show caring through their actions. I'm Marilyn Fitzpatrick. I'm a psychologist and a professor emerita of counseling psychology at McGill University. Our hero today is Chantal Thomas, and our focus for this episode is on humility. Chantal has worked throughout her career in the nonprofit sector, serving communities in need, immigrants and indigenous people. She refers to herself as a white settler to acknowledge her place in relation to the indigenous communities she's worked with. It's one of the many ways that she shows the humility that characterize how she cares. After we hear from Chantal, we'll be talking to Dr. Pelin Kesebir, an honorary fellow at the Center for Healthy Minds. Pelin has been studying how living with humility contributes to well-being. She and I will be talking about what humility is and what it isn't. We'll be considering what humility does for us, importantly, how it contributes to healthy relationships with ourselves and with others. We'll also dive into ideas of how to cultivate humility in children and adults, and learn how we can recognize the benefits of being humble. By the end of today's episode, you'll have a better understanding of what humility is and how to nurture it. And you'll have the inspiring example of our hero, Chantal Thomas, as a model of how to work with a spirit of humility.
My name is Chantal Thomas. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white settler here in Tiohtià:ke, known as Montreal. I am currently an intern at Medicine doing my stage in counseling psychology. Prior to that, I worked in a number of community organizations, nonprofits across Montreal. So I originally got into nonprofit work and into psychology in general, I'd say, due to a sense of overblown white savior complex. I wanted to help everybody and help save the world. And, here I am with all this knowledge and skills, and I can do all these things. And so I started off by volunteering at the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal, and very quickly learned that that was really the wrong approach to take. And I learned a lot of humility there. I learned a lot in general there, particularly about Indigenous history in Canada. And I am very lucky to have had so many people to have guided me and taken the time and energy to educate me, because I'm sure that wasn't very easy for them. So from there, it became more of a view of allyship and solidarity, and what can I do to come alongside someone? What help might they need? Involves me being really humble about it and asking quite simply, like, do you need me to do dishes? Even if that's below my skill set, below what I can do, if that's what's needed, that's what's needed. And if that's what's needed to build trust, then that's what I'm gonna have to be doing from the beginning. And so I became a frontline worker there for a couple of years. This was a lot of crisis management. I had the 4 to midnight shift, so sometimes it got a little rock and roll. Again, learned a lot about how to stay calm and cool in the middle of anything going on. I also built a lot of really beautiful relationships, people that I carry in my heart to this day. And again, a lot of people that were kind and gracious and educated me along the way that I'm incredibly grateful for. After a few years doing that, I moved into the family care worker role, which involved defending the rights of mothers who had their children in foster care. This was a very, very difficult job, as I'm sure it's been in the news quite a bit lately about how the foster care system is inherently racist, and some do call it the millennial scoop following the 60s scoop, following the residential scoop. And there are more Indigenous children in foster care today than there were in residential schools at the height of the residential school system. So I did that for about 8 months. It was very, very difficult, but I learned that there's some things that are worth fighting for, regardless of how hard it is to fight for them. There are just some things that are true and right and that should be fought for. Unfortunately, due to funding cuts, That position was reduced dramatically. So then I took on a job at the YWCA of Montreal, the Y des Femmes de Montréal. There I was an agent de milieu for about 5 years. And my job there was to be a resource person for families living in downtown Montreal. So that involved everything from pointing out where resources were, helping people sign up for school and daycare, running parent groups. The majority of it was working with immigrants. There were very few Quebecois families that I actually worked with. And so it was a lot of just education on winter and how do you dress a baby for winter. Very basic things like that, but it was still a lot of fun and still really rewarding. Unfortunately, in COVID, that position was also cut. So then I moved to the Native Friendship Center of Montreal, where I was for, again, about a little more than half a year. That was a case management position. So it was a mixture of frontline work, long-term work, and working within a team, doing a little bit of helping out with supervision and management to a certain extent. That was very, very difficult because COVID hit the homeless population really, really hard at about that time. And I burnt out principally. It was a lot of work and it was very, very difficult. Shortly after that, though, I started my stage, my internship at Medisci, doing psychology, doing counseling, which is a long-term goal of mine. In pivoting to counseling psychology, I am really happy to be moving from more of a group focus to an individual focus. I think both approaches are incredibly necessary. It's merely a question of my own personal preference to more focus on the individual. That said, like, it's important to keep in mind how the individual fits within the group. And it's still really important for me to have a social justice lens. And I do hope long-term at some point to be able to return to community work, maybe on a more volunteer basis, which wouldn't be so dependent on funding, but instead could be me coming in and providing maybe like pro bono counseling sessions, or maybe coming back to the roots of what's needed is doing dishes. So I'm going to go and I'm going to do dishes, even though I now have more experience and more qualifications. If that's what's needed, that's what's needed. And I'm happy to continue doing that, or, baking or childcare or whatever small tasks are needed. That's what's needed. And I'm happy to keep on doing that. Working for community organizations and nonprofits over the years, I find that the reward is so incredibly high in terms of knowing that you are making a difference in the world, no matter how small, is always there. It's always being validated. I'm really appreciative for all the opportunities that I had for growth over the years. I have many success stories of people that I've worked with. That's been incredibly exciting. That said, unfortunately, the funding is very precarious. You may think that you have a job and that's set and you're good, and then all of a sudden there's a change in government, or the private funder decides to pull out, or what have you, and then you're left, oh, well, this program I've been running for 5 years now no longer exists, and I don't know what to do. So that has been a big challenge and frustration over the years. I don't really see a solution to that other than more government support. Write your representative bodies and get them to give more money to nonprofits, because it's incredibly precarious work and it's hard to plan long-term if you don't know if you're going to have a job in the next year. One advice for anyone that is looking to either get into nonprofit professionally or even just as a volunteer business is to come at it with a great amount of humility. Like I said, sometimes it's as simple as doing dishes, and it takes a while to build trust and build relationships. And that's not something that you get automatically on your first day. That takes time. It has to be earned. It needs to be worked for. And so there's great value to coming in and doing dishes. For those of you that maybe have a few more means, I would highly recommend donating to your local nonprofit. A little bit goes a really, really long way. And as I said, with precarious funding, it is incredibly needed. I recommend looking into your local Native Friendship Center in your own city, wherever that might be, or any women's shelters or even homeless shelters that you have around. They're the ones that are always, always in need and often on very precarious funding. The biggest impact on me over the years has been how much I have learned, particularly when it comes to working with indigenous peoples. I am just incredibly humbled and incredibly grateful to all the elders and teachers that have taken the time to listen to my really ignorant questions and to provide workshops and generally be there and support me and be kind, so incredibly kind when I've made mistakes and when I have overstepped. This grace that has been extended to me is an incredibly invaluable experience for me, and something that I try very, very hard to extend to other people as I go about educating others and passing along the information that has been given to me, and doing my best to strive to be an ally. That's not a term that I bestow upon myself, because I think it's something you're always working towards, something that it's a value, it's unachievable. You're always trying your best. And I'm just so grateful for the help that I've gotten along the way, and I hope that I can pass that along to others.
So this afternoon, joining us to talk about the interview with Chantal Thomas is Pelin Kesebir. And Dr. Kesebir is an honorary fellow at the Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's a social psychologist, and her research looks at the intersection between happiness or wellness and virtues or values, and how those things feed into one another, and also in ways that we can encourage people to pursue healthy values and receive those benefits. So today I'm going to be talking to Dr. Kesebir about one value in particular, and that's the value of humility. So welcome, Pelin.
Hi, so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Maybe you could start us off by talking about what you see humility as in everyday terms. And if you wouldn't mind, sometimes there's a popular perception that humility is kind of weakness or meekness or a lack of pride in ourselves.
Right.
So if you can talk about what is humility and what it isn't.
Absolutely, I'll be happy to. We look at humility, first of all, as a character strength. It's definitely not a weakness, it's a virtue. It is a personality quality that allows us, I believe, to relate to ourselves, to other people, and to the broader reality in optimal ways. So humility is not lacking self-confidence, not at all. But humility is really about a lack of self-consciousness or a lack of self-importance. Now, we all obviously need to think about ourselves, right? There's a reason,
Yes.
evolutionary reason why we have a self. It is adaptive. But I believe, and you might agree, that many of us think about ourselves way more than needed and way more than adaptive. So humble people, they do not have a high degree of unnecessary self-preoccupation.
So if I go back to some of the things that Chantal was talking about in her interview, she had mentioned wanting very much to help people and starting out with something she called a white savior complex. Wanting to kind of save the world and having to learn from others that wasn't necessarily an optimal thing. It wasn't necessarily a great place to start in her helping efforts. But as she talked about it, it seemed to me that she was kind of comfortable with the idea that she'd started there and she'd had to learn different things. And that seems to me a little bit like what you're talking about, that not an excessive preoccupation with the fact that I started in this place that wasn't very good,
Right.
but a willingness to accept that and to learn from it.
Absolutely. And if you are humble, then you can learn from the process, and it's part of humility. You might say, I started at a place where I was actually coming to it from a more, white savior, maybe even more narcissistic place. I was more focused on myself helping others than helping others. But I have evolved, I have grown. I think that is great. That's really gaining perspective, right? It's a truer perspective when you can see where you were and how you have evolved. All of that is part of wisdom, and of course humility is a big part of wisdom.
You might want to comment, as Chantal does in a number of places, about everything she had to learn to do, which is, it seems to me, I mean, in terms of your model relationship to self, to reality, and to others, it's really a strong relationship to reality when I can learn from the people around me and from what happens to me.
Absolutely. And it's really about not positioning ourselves either above or under other people. So humble people, they are comfortable being on the same plane with others. They do not need to feel superior to others to feel okay. But at the same time, they also do not feel inferior to others. So they do not exaggerate the meaning of the difference between themselves and others. And in Chantal's words too, I think I could observe a lot of that. She was talking about how she has learned a lot from others in her work with indigenous people. And she was also talking about how, for example, if you gotta wash the dishes, you wash the dishes. You do not see yourself as a person above doing dishes, right? If other people are doing dishes, why wouldn't you, right? Because you are not that different from them. And that's a crucial characteristic of humility, I would say. When you are humble and you do not exaggerate the meaning of your differences with other people, you are egalitarian and you attribute basic dignity, basic worth to everybody. And I could observe a lot of that in Chantal's words.
Yes, she used a word that I wasn't familiar with, but I understood it immediately: allyship. Coming alongside people, being an ally with them, which is a very egalitarian idea.
Exactly, because when you are an ally, you are standing next to people. You are not, ahead of them, behind them, above them, under them. You are together in this.
The thing that I was struck by in your model, and you might want to say a couple of words about it, is the idea that when I am in this relationship to myself that humble people are in, my efforts don't need to succeed in order for me to feel good about them. And so if I think about her interview, there was a number of places where she said, and then the funding ended, or then the program stopped, or my job was eliminated. And of course, that's one of the hard things about doing community work is the funding issue. But again, that didn't seem personal to her. It seemed sad and part of the social reality, but she didn't need to be the head of the program or to have this thing become big in order for her to do the work. She went on to the next thing.
Right. Absolutely. I feel the opposite of humility. When you have a really big ego, you tie your happiness so much to the gratification of your desires, to achieving things, to getting things your way. And then something like not getting a funding, you could perceive it as a huge personal failure. But if you are more humble, you can take a more wiser perspective, and you do not make everything about yourself. And because of that, I believe it's a link to well-being. Humble people are more likely to recover from failures, or they are more resilient in the face of such setbacks because they do not make things about them. Yeah.
Well, that takes us really to kind of the next question, which is what you've referred to humility as the soil in which happiness grows, which I think that was a lovely expression. It stuck in my mind. And maybe we could start talking a little bit about how you understand what happiness is. I know you've written with Ed Diener, who's very prominent in this area about happiness. So just talk to us a little bit about how you understand happiness, and then we can talk about the relationship between happiness and humility.
Sure. Well, happiness, it's a subject that has been studied quite a lot in the past, I would say 3 decades or 4 decades or so. And by now we have a pretty solid understanding of what it is, even though it's not easy to achieve it. And I look at happiness as a sense of enduring well-being, and a fundamental sense of feeling okay, feeling comfortable, even when things are not going well. So it's this underlying sense of contentment that we can tap into even when things are not going well. So we do not think of happiness as a temporary emotion. Of course, there are positive emotions or negative emotions, and you can experience them. But when I talk about happiness, I talk about something that is more enduring, and you can be a happy person even if you experience unhappiness in your life. Actually, that's the only way to experience happiness, because nobody can always experience positive emotions, right?
Okay.
So that's how I understand happiness. It's an enduring sense of well-being. And when I say that humility contributes to this sense of well-being, I have a couple things in mind, and they're actually all tied to this idea that humility allows us to relate to ourselves, to others, and to reality in optimal ways. So we have actually kind of touched upon how when you are humble, you have a secure sense of self, right? The opposite of this is when your self-esteem, for example, is unstable. Right? So one day something good happens to you and you feel on top of the world, and the next day you experience a failure and you are down in the dumps. So that's an unstable sense of self-esteem, and it's also unstable happiness. And when you lack humility, you are more likely to experience those, because again, humility or the opposite of humility makes you tie your sense of self to these ups and downs in your lives. But humility is about this more stable, calm, serene sense of self. So that's one way. Another way, which is very, I think, obvious, is that when we are humble, we just have better relationships. I think we all know the toxic effect that non-humble people can have in our lives, right? Like narcissistic people, there's a lot of talk about that these days. I mean, they are really bad for relationships. And when you are humble, you can just relate to people in a much more open, warm-hearted way, because you are unencumbered by your own self or your own sense of self-importance, right? You are not constantly trying to impress others. Rather, you are just more interested in them. And because of humility also has to do with being sensitive to others' needs, being respectful of their perspectives, which is again something that I think we could see in our heroes' words, Chantal's sense that like the people she worked with, how much she has learned from them, how much respect she had for their perspectives and for their for what they could teach her, but also her sensitivity to the needs of the people she worked with, right? All of those are part of humility, and they allow you to have better relationships with others, which clearly will contribute to happiness.
I would
And
think also, and you may have findings that bear on this, or have thoughts about it at least, that when things go wrong, and I am humble, if I see myself as like everyone else in the world, not more special, not worse, but not more special than others, I know that there's a great deal of trouble in the world. I know people go through difficulties all the time. And so when it happens to me, it's not, how could this happen to me? It's like, it's more like, oh yeah, now it's happening to me. It happens to everybody.
so true, so true. It's like I'm just like everybody else. So if they are going through difficulties, then why shouldn't I? What's so special about me, right? So it's now my turn. I mean, being human, that involves suffering, and if other people suffer, what makes me so special that I wouldn't suffer? So again, we are coming back to this idea of true perspective, right? You have perspective, and you can see that yeah, if other people suffer, then I can suffer too. And the flip side, I think, of what you said is when you suffer, you think that others suffer too. But also when you see others suffering, you also think, oh, this could also happen to me. So it's really, there is this sense of interconnectedness and this empathy that makes you more, maybe more altruistic or more willing to help others. So definitely humility creates that sense of that shared faith, this interconnectedness with others. There is more of an awareness of how we are all in a way a human family, and what one of us experiences is gonna affect the experiences of others, and so on.
Yeah, and it allows consideration of where others are coming from, what their needs will be. If I'm humble and I see myself as allied to them in my humanity, it's normal for me to think, oh, it's winter, it's Montreal, it's cold, you have to dress your baby. You probably don't know how to do that. That like, you have to kind of to see yourself as someone who could be in that position in order to think of those things.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep.
So Hero Next Door is really about helping people to cultivate better ways to live by hearing the stories of Hero. And I'm hoping that we could spend some time talking about your thoughts on cultivating humility. I know that maybe the research isn't as strong in this area, but obviously you've thought a lot about it. The Center for Healthy Minds is oriented towards helping people think about how to live better. Talk to me about what you think. Well, let's start first with kids, because maybe there are some parents listening to us and they would like to, how would I help my child to be humble? I don't want them not to feel good about themselves, but how do I help them be humble?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, first of all, we need to realize humility is a personality trait, and like with other personality traits, there is a genetic component to it. So actually each child comes to this world with different tendencies to be more or less humble, but at the same time we also know that personality traits, they are responsive to the environment and they can change. I think a really crucial thing for parents is to realize that they need to be sensitive and responsive to the child's needs, and which is something that many parents do anyway. But that responsiveness and that sensitivity is crucial to foster in the child a sense of security. And that security is really, really important. We have talked about this strong ego or quiet ego. So it's this sense of self-esteem, which is secure, which is not fragile. That can only be supported by caregivers or parents who make the child realize that she or he is loved, accepted as they are. And so that's, I think, the number one thing. So to the extent that we can give the child love and respect, of course, so that the child will feel secure without feeling like superior to others, right? That's another part. So you don't want to foster in the child a sense of narcissism or superiority by constantly, like, for example, praising the child. But you also want to instill in the child a sense of like solidarity with others, be a role model. I mean, that's actually probably the best thing that parents can do, right? If they are humble and if they, in their dealings with others, exemplify that quality, that will be more important than anything else really that they can do, right? So be altruistic, be sensitive to others' needs, be grateful, because that's also part of it goes with humility. So I believe those are the things that come to my mind when it comes to like children and parents. But also schools, for example, they can create environments where the quality of humility can be cultivated. How? For example, through like school projects that encourage helping the needy, or involving the children in activities where they get exposed to different types of people, maybe people who need help. So activities where children can experience a sense of connection to the rest of society. Yeah, and then also I think culture plays a really important role, right? The cultural role models that we are surrounded with on a day-to-day basis, that's crucial, right? So if you are constantly seeing people in like social media, maybe on TV, in the newspapers, like who are narcissistic and who seem to not only get away with it, but also seem to be rewarded for these qualities, I mean, that actually is very, I mean, it's a very difficult situation, right? Because if the culture rewards narcissism, then why wouldn't you want to be that way, right? And of course, we cannot change culture at large, but we can change, for example, who we expose ourselves to, like the people, for example, we follow on social media, or the people that we I don't know, maybe vote for or support in other ways. Like, do they have a sense of humility? That's something to bear in mind, I believe.
Okay. So certainly as we talk to people who are parents or who are teachers, fostering humility by making the child feel secure and responded to is a great strategy. Providing an example to ourselves, or encouraging our kids to go on social media sites that that talk about these kinds of things, that showcase these kinds of things. But as we get to adults, and some of our listeners will be therapists and coaches and people who work with adults who may not have had all that wonderful parenting that led them to have this secure attachment, secure sense of self. Are there things that adults can do to foster their own humility?
Yeah, great question. Um, I believe that even the desire to foster humility is in and of itself a great start, because I mean, there are many people who are not even aware that they are lacking in humility. They do not see this as a problem. So that's a great start. I believe there are qualities related to humility, and some of them we have talked about, like, for example, being sensitive to the needs of others, or, for example, being grateful, right? And again, we see that in Chantal a lot. She has expressed so much gratitude for so many people with whom she has worked. And when we focus less on ourselves and more on others through practices such as gratitude or engaging in, for example, charity work, I believe that will be one way in which we can cultivate humility. So the more we take the focus off of ourselves and turn our focus to others, I think that will help. But I think it's also important to realize that humble, to be able to afford to be humble, almost, we need to feel confident in ourselves, right? And self-confidence, it's really not something that you can fake. I believe you cannot be like, oh, I'm confident, and you will suddenly feel confident. No, that's not going to happen. I believe to experience genuine self-worth, we need to live the kind of life that makes us feel worthy, and that means living up to our values, whatever our values are. When we can express these values in our lives, when we believe that we are living a life that is consistent with our highest values, with our highest self, then we will feel self-worth. And when we feel that self-worth, it will become so much easier to not be occupied with ourselves, to turn the focus more to others. So I believe we also need to change the way we live. If we feel there are things we can do in our lives to live more in harmony with our values, then we should do that, because that will allow us to grow more genuine self-confidence, which in turn will lead to humility.
It's interesting, the perspective you're presenting, because you're saying, understand my highest values, live my highest values, and then I will have the self-confidence to be humble. It's so if I do my very best, I will end up less concerned with myself.
Absolutely. But maybe I should add one caveat, and that is, of course, not all values are created equal, right? So if your values are maybe like extrinsic values, in psychology, we talk about extrinsic values. So you want to be so rich, or you want to become famous, or you want to be really powerful for just power's sake, but not to contribute to the well-being of others. So I don't know if those would make you more humble, even if you live.
Well, there's quite a bit of good research that says materialistic values make us unhappy. That aspiring to these things is associated with not good things. Maybe you could say a few words about some of the good things that humility is associated with.
Yeah, no, humility appears to be related with many other virtues that we have researched. I've mentioned a couple. For example, we know with gratitude, there's a really high correlation. Like wisdom, there's a high correlation. Like helpfulness, charity, empathy, forgiveness, and intellectual humility, which I believe is really important in this social environment that we are living in, which is about being aware of the limits of our own perspective and of our own knowledge, right? Being intellectually humble. All of those are related to humility. We also know that there's some incipient research, but studies also suggest that there's a relation between humility and health, physical health. And of course, we expect that because healthy mind and healthy body, they are always correlated. And if a quality helps you become happier, it also helps you become healthier. So those are, in a nutshell, the benefits of humility.
You also have reviewed some research on depression and anxiety, and there's not a large body of research here, but there are certainly studies that suggest that being humble is related to lower depression, lower anxiety, greater well-being, greater.
Definitely. And this ties to a quite well established finding that excessive levels of self-preoccupation are linked to psychological distress. And we know that, and your field is counseling psychology, so you would know this even better. But in many psychological disorders, we observe excessive self-preoccupation, right? Okay, like narcissism, that's a very clear example of that. But even in other psychological disorders like depression, or for example, body dysmorphic disorders, again, where there is a lot of obsession with one's physical appearance, or
social anxiety.
Social anxiety is, I think it's perhaps the first example of that, or maybe when you experience like paranoid episodes, like when you think you are being persecuted or you are being followed. There's always this focus on the self, and that's, as I said, that's a well-established finding that excessive self-focus is related to psychological distress. And so because humility is the opposite of that, we expect that really helps with better psychological health.
You also reference some work indicating that perhaps the experience of awe is
right.
implicated in developing humility.
That is right. Yeah. The sense of awe is something that you feel mostly in the presence of, mostly in nature. Nature can help us experience awe maybe more than anything else. And there are studies which have shown that when people are experimentally made to experience awe, they report greater levels of humility. And I think we can explain this when we think when we feel awe, we feel connected to a higher reality, to something that is larger than us. And it's that sense of feeling connected to something bigger than us, I believe, that helps us feel more humble.
Oh, okay. It's interesting that you talk about it as a connection to something bigger. I had thought about it as I watch a beautiful sunset, or I see an enormous mountain, or those are things that would inspire awe in me. And those give me a sense of my own smallness in the universe. That I'm a part of it, but I'm just small. There's so much that's bigger than me.
Right. But I think what you say, that's actually very true. But maybe we can think of it this way: you feel small, but you don't feel insignificant, because
right.
So you feel small, but you are part of this amazing reality. So I think the two go together, right?
Good. Thank you. Before we stop, are there any things that you would recommend to people as resources, places they could look, apps they could use?
Yeah, we do have an app, the Healthy Minds app, which is freely available, and it's a wonderful app which is about cultivating healthy qualities of the mind, and that would definitely help with humility. Other than that, yeah, I'm afraid I cannot think of any direct resource. Yeah, my apologies.
No, let me thank you, Pelin, for being here today and for being willing to generously give of your time to let us know something about humility.
My pleasure. Thank
And
you so
on
much.
behalf of Hero Next Door, thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Hero Next Door. I hope the words of our hero, Chantal Thomas, and the thoughts of our expert, Dr. Kesebir, have given you ideas that will help you understand and develop humility in yourself and in the people you work with. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Hero Next Door on your podcast channel or on YouTube. And join us again to hear the stories of everyday heroes and to learn how to identify, cultivate, and enjoy your own caring values.